Hello, this is the mask and resist workshop that we are doing here at Hobby Ceramic Craft. We're doing it here on a large jug shape because in theory, this will be one of many samples that you will have or hopefully have within your studio that can show off the very many ways that a resist or a mask can be used. We're going to work on our perfect picture today. So we have a piece of bisque that I've wiped down with a sponge. And what I suggest is that you have all your equipment and ready to go, because we're going to just run through how to use everything. And it's easier when everything is easy to hand, but you know that already. So there's a template that also came with the instructions. And from that template, you are going to cut out the first part, which is the actual beehive. So I've tried to choose something that was big and that could really show off the different techniques that we're going to use. So I fold the piece of paper in half long ways, because then I know that I'm going to get an even size on my beehive. And I'm going to make it straight. Now I've got it about 2 fingers away from the handle because I've got some details that I want to add there, and I've got it up off the floor. Because the actual beehive is made out of straw, it would need to be raised off of the ground on a bit of a table. So this is what we're going to be leaving some space for. I'm using a felt tip. Everything that is not glaze or ceramic will fire off in the kiln at cone 06, but the pigments and the alcohol in pens disappears. Trouble you have sometimes with felt tip is that it'll absorb a lot of water and it'll start to blur, and sometimes it may even completely disappear. If you've got a lot of water from glaze, that will make that pen disappear. For this purpose, it doesn't matter a minute. So the next part, paint the shape in with 2 coats of your lighter yellow. So I want you to use the colors that are befitting to your studio, because sometimes you might not have the exact color that I've given you, and then you will spend your whole time with a customer wanting just that one color that you have on your sample. And if you don't have that one color, then it makes your life a little bit harder. So use colors that are frequently used within your studio so that they are easily accessible for you. So that's my 2 layers on my pale yellow, just like that. Now, the next thing we have to do is keep this beehive. That's important. Keep your beehive, because we're going to use that again in a minute. So I'm using scrap photocopy paper as my scrap paper, but you can use anything. I would really recommend magazine sheets or something like, I don't know, I mentioned today earlier, the Tesco cookery book. You know, you get the free one as you go out. If you use those highly printed pages, they've got a little bit of a gloss on them. When we paint over just normal photocopy paper, it tends to really absorb that color, and then you can sometimes lose what you stuck in there, the resist that gets a little bit lost. But if you're using something with a lot of paint on it, that printed color, then it's easier for you to see and it's easier for you to remove. Now we're going to be cutting out the leaf shapes, and I was kind of thinking this kind of like eucalyptus style leaf seems to be quite nice at the moment, and I finish off with a little bit of a heart, so you can see how quickly I drew those. So what I tend to do is I fold quite a number of sheets together, and then I'll cut them out all at the same time. I'm going to trim around all of them so that I've just got this collection of leaves that I can pick and choose for my sprigs. And this sprig is going to go across some of the hive. So we'll learn how to do that. Now, this technique that we're doing is often called paper painting or paper stamping. And what we're doing is we're using it to apply color at the same time as we are applying the paper resist. So this paint goes directly onto the paper. Look at how thick that is. So lovely and thick, thicker and thinner in some parts. This gives sometimes a very tie-dye effect. And I'm going to just stick the paper onto the bisque. Well, I go with a nice damp sponge and tap it over. You don't want to use it quite aggressively because that will just lift the paper. What you want to do is tap it down, because what it's doing is wetting the paper and allowing that to mix in with the paint. It's happy with the paint. The paint is now really lovely and wet still and is going into the bisque. So your water from your paint is adhering the actual paper there onto the bisque. Now what I want to do while I'm here and I think about it is just make a bit of a line as to what I want my shape of my twig to be, my sprig, because this is the part that we're doing now. All right, so we're going to do this, and you can see I'm not worried too much about it touching or being, I'm not massively brilliant at sticking to the rules and being even and things like that. So do take your time if you love that. So I'm going to take the bits of paper and I'm going to stick them all down, some mid-sized ones, and I think I'm going to go from little to big. I painted the medium-sized one, so I'm going to stick that lower down because I think I quite like another little one. So it doesn't matter that it's this messy, and it doesn't matter if it's too much paint. If you have too little paint, then the wetting is going to reinvigorate that paint, but also you do want to make sure that there's quite a lot of pigment on there. If you don't have enough, you go back in and you paint them. That's no problem. I'm going to come along here and I want to add some leaves over my beehive. So this one is green, yes, and it is slightly darker green than the yellow, yes, but I don't want that green to fight with that yellow stroke and coat. So what I'm going to do is just quickly wipe away the stroke and coat underneath and stick down that. And here, this one here is going to go there. So he's square on that one. So I'm going to wipe away very roughly, and it doesn't matter if it's too much. It's okay, it's okay. So with a clean sponge, I'm just going to work away any excess of that green. Now, this is also great because we've been really messy and our fingers are everywhere. So we've got lovely green fingerprints, which don't need to be a problem. We're adhering the paper down onto the bisque. We're tidying away fingerprints, splotches and splurges, and that's really what we want to see. Right, so that's those leaves. While we're still on a leaf theme, I've got a leaf here just underneath the handle as well. And then I'm going to put it there, and then this sprig is going to join up. So we're also looking at the composition of this piece, that it sits nicely on your shelf, that it isn't just a how-to, but it's quite nice for you to fill the flowers in your own studio. Then the next thing we want to do is stick down our table. So our table is quite literally a piece of paper that is long like this. So we're going to be using lots of these colors throughout the piece. So what I'm doing at the moment is I'm painting a piece of paper now. Lots of this is really not the easiest way to do it, but I wanted to show you all of the ways that you can get color and use resists in this situation. So what I'm going to be using now is a piece of string. So it's a piece of parcel string. So if you think just a ball of cream string, it's cotton, so it doesn't stretch, doesn't matter if it does, but let's get messy and dip it into the paint. And then I would like you to drape that down that loose pen line that we made that's coming down our leaves. Then I take a brush with the same green and I'm going to go over it just to give it a little bit of a bed in, because when things want to come up off of the bisque, we have to rely on the absorbency of the bisque. And that's an awesome thing. You don't get that in many medium. And using the bisque and its absorbency is actually an awesome little bonus that we get to sticking things down. So I have one more piece of string that I want to lay in on this particular sprig, and I'll put that there. Need a bit more green to get that really stuck down. So I could just lay this piece of string directly onto the bisque and then paint over it. But the piece of string where the piece of string has been will be white. You want to also make sure that your sprig, your string and your bit of twig is looking how you want it to look. So we've got the string down. I'm going to paint a little bit of green over that just to really keep it in. And then I run over it with my damp sponge, because with my brush, I've gone in quite close to the string and the bisque where it's joined there. So I'm wiping it down, but it's managed to tuck in underneath and make a better adhesion. And also we want to make sure that the stroking coat that we put over, we're going to be doing 3 layers. And so that's going to be stronger than that pale green. That's fine. But what if it isn't enough? And what if we are using a darker green? Maybe you've chosen to use number 8 or something like that. And you want to make sure that, that you don't have that kind of seepage of color that you wish you didn't have. So we've got all that. Now, the next thing we want to do is reapply our beehive here, all right? So we're using the resist back on it. So very much like our leaves. Now, yes, I could have painted this all yellow and stuck it down, but it would have taken seconds to dry and it would have needed to have quite a lot of paint put on it. Because this beehive is going to be the main showstopper, the bits that I want to really show off about resist, I wanted the base color to be lovely and strong. And the other areas can sometimes come up with a tie-dye effect. Now, I'm not saying this is easy and foolproof, but it's pretty cool. What I'm doing is I'm going over my piece of paper like I did with my leaves as well. So not only am I trying to see if there's any displacement and make my lines nice and clean, but I'm also really wanting my paper to stick down, because that is going to create that nice clean line. And that's what we really want, you know. All this is now stuck down awesomely. All right, now my next step that I need to do is painting the base for the wax resist. Now, the wax resist, I don't know if you've used wax resist before. It's an awesome product. So if I paint wax resist directly onto bisque, it will stay bisque until after the firing, because the paint cannot get anywhere near the bisque. The wax is resisting it. That makes good sense, huh? So I don't want to have plain unpainted bisque on my pottery, because it's not very food safe. It will absorb water and cause all sorts of disasters. So we don't want that. We're going to use a bit of white underneath, and so the wax, when it burns away, will have stroking coat underneath it, which is a glaze in itself, and so we don't need to reglaze it. So if I use wax resist directly onto bisque, I would then have unglazed bisque where my writing was, and I would have to reapply clear glaze over that writing and then fire it again. Now, I put my white on there and I'm waiting for that to dry. I'm going to flip it over, and here is when the really fun stuff starts. Here, I'm going to put some foliage in. So I had to go outside and have a little dig around and see what I could find. So we're going to paint it green, because most of my foliage is going to be green. You can add a little bit brown underneath if you want to, because this is underneath a table, so it might be a little bit darker. It's up to you, but we've got all the color palette there if we want to use it. So I'm going to paint it green, and then I'm going to take literally sprigs of plant life and I'm going to embed it into the paint. Do you see how I've got wet paint underneath and then I'm painting it over? When we were doing this earlier, we had some ivy, and ivy has quite a waxy leaf, so it resisted being painted. So we could use it as like a stencil or a stamp. You can use that firm waxiness to your advantage. But for this at the moment, all I'm trying to do is embedding paint with plants, with leaves. So imagine doing this with a great big piece of fern, and you painted the background of this white or soft green or anything you like. Then you embed that fern in. So you put it into the wet paint and then you paint over it with a little bit of extra paint. And that really fuses it in. You and I know that dry glaze is hard. If you try and unblock a writer bottle or open a paint bottle that's had a bit of a drippage, you know that it's nice and firm. And so that's what this glaze is doing. All the water is leaving and leaving just glass, and it's leaving that to set, and it's doing that job by holding that, what seemingly is a non-porous thing, but it's trapping it in there because it's fine enough. So we're just going to embed all these bits of grass and twigs and stuff like that in there. All right, so everything is stuck down. Our white paint is dry, and then we're going to use the wax. So this is the product that we're using. It's wax resist from Mayco. Buy what you need and use it quite quickly, because it doesn't like to sit on a shelf for very long. I'm going to use a brush. You can write on this with felt tip before you go into it, but you can do it yourself quite nicely like this. So the wax, once it's gone on to the bare bisque, so it doesn't want to come off until it's fired, because it's absorbed into the actual clay body. You want to make sure that you don't drip it anywhere. So you've got some taller bits here. I'm going to try, so where you've got some dollops of the wax, I'm going to try and spread those out a little bit, because they'll just take a little bit longer to dry. So we've got our wax on here, and you can see from the sheener that that's still quite wet. Our next step that we'll want to do is paint the rest of it, and we're going to paint that with soft blue. And I've chosen my blue heaven, but I've chosen Stroke and Coat just because I really like the color. But I realized afterwards that actually using a foundation would have been a much better option. Foundations are designed for being just that, the basis of your piece. So if you've got a lot to cover and you've got a lot to color in, like we have, then by all means use a foundation. And especially if you were doing a workshop, then it's so much more cost effective for you, and the glaze goes on that much smoother as well when you're applying your 2 or 3 layers onto it. So we're going to go over the paper where it joins. Now I have to paint all the inside of the paper, because that is just a little bit of a waste of our pale blue, and I'm going to go over the foliage like that. So with any of this painting now, what I'm really trying to do is not displace anything, but I would have painted over it quite well with the base color already. And so as we go over it, I'm painting carefully, but with confidence, all over the piece. I'm coming to my wax last though, because where I put my brush down first is that bit thicker. So I'm painting over with this soft blue. So remembering that I put down Stroke and Coat first underneath my wax, so that I have a gloss finish underneath it. Now, I've got a little bit here, but you can also cut out some bees. So on my samples, I have done all sorts of everything, and they're the photos that you can see on the website. And one of the things was just cutting out little shapes, because sometimes drawing everything from scratch takes that bit longer than colouring in a little piece of paper and sticking it down. And when you colour in a little piece of paper and stick it down, you've got that shape. I'm going to put bees all down my handle, actually. That's where my bees are. They're not going into the house. They're going to be coming up over the handle. So I've taken some white ovals, which literally have taken me a second. I've painted them yellow, and then I'm dabbing them over like this, so that when I paint over them, they will be yellow, because that's the base color. And then I just have to add a couple of stripes. So we put on all of our soft blue. So do you see how I'm just wiping back a little bit of it, because it's a stalk, so it doesn't really matter how perfectly equal it is, because I've got a big bowl of garden bits here, and no one blade of grass is the same as the other blade of grass, or one dandelion leaf is the same as the other dandelion leaf. So it gives us a great deal of flexibility Okay, and then the last is where I'm going to go over that wax now. So by the time we put 3 coats of stroke and coat over the wax is going to be pretty much lost under the stroke and coat. So this comes to a bit of a thing about if I forgot something, if I forgot a piece of paper, if I didn't take it off, what would happen? Well, it's covered in paint, so if it gets to cone 06, the paint that's there is going to melt, and that's going to buckle on itself, and it's going to cause an irregularity in the glaze, and the paper is going to burn away, and it's going to cause it to move, and you'll see that there's been a problem in the glaze. Now, because we put a base glaze underneath, that might be all right. You will probably want to touch it up and then refire it. That's in the absolute worst case scenario. Now, going over the wax, that's a different story. That's going to have a layer of paint over my writing. So if I've done really thick writing, you will start to see the paint starting to pool on top of the wax. And that's awesome. You can definitely dab off any excess paint that's on that wax, any glaze that's on that wax. You can see if I dab for a little bit, you can see that you can start to see the words again. But you know, it's not the worst thing in the world when you start to have that pooling of glaze. So this is where I didn't do the wax very heavily. I didn't paint it massively heavily. And on this sample, I did a little bit more. You can see on here, you see the specks of blue? This is where I left paint on the wax. And it's not the worst thing in the world. You can lift that off, of course you can, with the end of a tissue or a Q-tip or something like that. That's fine, that's absolutely fine. So for the purposes of showing you on here, I'm not going to do 3 layers because I want it to dry quite quickly so I can show you what the next steps are. But I do want to cover up my colors here. What I want to do here on this part with my writing is take a slightly darker blue. So this is number 11. This is Blue Yonder. And I'm going to take it and I'm going to dab it over my writing. This is basically got nothing to do with the wax. What it has to do with is me choosing such a pale top coat and the white being quite pale itself. I wanted to make sure that you could read my writing. So when you've got just this blush of blue here, you can add blue to the handles and to the rim, just to really anchor down your ensemble so that you've got all sorts of different elements of interest onto your piece. So if I wanted to, I could take a wet brush, and where I can see my writing, I can run the wet brush over it, and then I could expose my writing a little bit more if I wanted that to be a really clear thing. You see, it's not a sopping wet brush. I've wet it and then I dab it on a sponge and it starts to bring up my letters. So you can start to see a little bit more. Now we can start with the reveal, because currently we've just got a very bizarre looking jug with wet stuff stuck on it, and we can start to peel and reveal what we've got. So we've got the string coming off there, and then I can start to peel off. Now you can use a cocktail skewer, definitely, but I'm peeling off the paper as I go so that I can see what I've got underneath. Now if I've got a smudge, got that base of color and it's still quite damp, so I can really manipulate it quite nicely. Then I can peel off and you can see all of my images there. So if you want to, by all means, go back in and paint it again. You certainly can. Add some shading, add some color. But what the resist has done is that it has given you a shape. It's given you an outline to work to. So if you like this tie-dye effect, which I absolutely do, you can just stick with that. That's no problem. But you can also go in and you can add more details. So then I'm going to take off my big hive, and underneath here I can see that I've got the green leaves still there. So that's really great. Just keep all your sticky paint covered paper out the way, and you can then do all of your... Now, I'm going to leave this on because when we were doing the sample before, we realized that it would be a good idea to leave it on. And then we take off the rest of our sticky string and our leaves, and we've got all of this great. Let's see if you can see that. Last couple of bits. There you go. All right. Now, let me tidy up a little bit and we can see where we are. This is where the interesting bit starts. So we have lots of other things that you can embed into paint. And this is really the crucial part of it. So you can use resist to keep back color from other bits. And so some of these things are manufactured in factories far, far away. We don't have to be able to make lace vinyl tape at all in our little studios. We can just buy it and it looks amazing. Now, the vinyl that we're using, we can wash it and then use it again, because we're not using its adhesive qualities. We're using it as a resist, which the plastic is doing a great job of doing. And we're bedding it into the glaze, so we do not need it to be sticky. So this is a vinyl cutter that I used using a Big Shot machine. You can also use things on a Cricut machine or on a Brother Scan and Cut. You can do all sorts of things like that. So we're going to be using and laying these particular things into the glaze. And I'm going to use the pale yellow that I had at first, and I'm going to be reinvigorating that with water. And I'm also going to be laying on some watered down paint as well, some watered down glaze. So I'm going to decide where I'm going to put all my things. So I think the first thing that I find hard to do is I'm going to tear some paper to be this part. You can see on my sample, I've got all sorts of shapes of things to try and accentuate the curve of the hive. So I'm just wetting this yellow and I'm using a little bit of the glaze to stick it down. And that was torn paper. I'm going to use some of this vinyl tape now. So this can be a bit tricksy hard, but because this is straight, this is curved, this picture and this jug as well. But what we're going to do is we're going to add some little cuts in it, and then that will help it to turn the corners. You can see it doesn't stick because the powdered glass is powder as it dries, and so it doesn't want you to stick anything to it. But what I want to do is just add a few nicks and cuts in it so that we can get it around the shape. And then I'm going to use some of the yellow, and I'm going to reinvigorate the yellow that's underneath and just get that well and truly embedded into that yellow. So you can use your fingers. This is messy time, but it's worth it. It's amazing. It's a wonderful thing. You can get all sorts of this tape, so you can get it online. When I did the originals for the samples, I just got it from Poundland, and it looked quite sweet, and I couldn't find it back again because our local Poundland shut down. I'm going to put some of my string down. So can you see all of these fluffy bits? Because every fluffy bit is going to be another bit of resisted color. So wherever we're putting this, wherever we're putting our vinyl, is going to be pale yellow. I'm using a mixture of water and glaze. What we need to do, we've embedded our paper, and you can put whatever you want in. You can add more bees up into this wonderful beehive. You can put more leaves into it. You can do all sorts of anything. You can try sticking new things that I never even thought to stick into glaze. So over all of this, we now go with the darker shade of yellow. The idea with this kind of building up the resist is starting with the paler colors and then layering up as we go with a darker shade. So this is just number 97, Cantaloupe, and that is a slightly darker, richer yellow. But if you didn't have all of these different glazes, just add a little bit of orange to it, or add a little bit of brown. You certainly can. So I'll do 3 good layers on here. Now, while I'm doing this, I'm very mindful that I want my hive to look curved, so I might add in some lines to give the impression that it was curved, and I'm going to blend those colors in with the cantaloupe. And I'm going to show you, after we've got all of our layers on, as we peel off all those tiny little fluffy bits that are on there. And then you can see the pattern left behind when I take off the tape. And then when I take off the paper, you can see that as well. So there are my bees. There's my hive. So this blue, you can see it's really scattered now because we've got a lot of paint over it. A lot of water has gone into the bisque, but it doesn't matter. That will all burn away. But what we have got is we have got the use of all those resists showing all of that detail, the interest there within the foliage as that kind of resist. And you can see also with the writing showing up there. So now that that's dried a little bit, I can go back in and I can really tidy that up if I want to. And if I had a little piece of cotton wool, then that would also be very lovely and tidy it up. But I quite like the dapple look. I quite like that because I've basically made a very organic piece that has very interesting elements to it. And especially with the foliage, I think that just kicks it really right off. On this particular one, I left the leaf on while I was painting it. So my brilliant green leaf is there. So using the resist in all of its talents to keep paint away. And really that's what we were doing with that. Now, the final thing that I haven't used is the piece of vinyl. Now, the awesome thing about the vinyl, it's awesome and it's also not great, is that vinyl obviously doesn't break down because it's plastic. So it's not a very environmentally friendly product to have. But because it doesn't break down, we can wash it. And this bee has been used a number of times. He's a wonderful fellow and he comes out quite often. I feel a little bit better and I can use it over and over again. This bee is not sticky in any way, shape or form anymore. But what I'm doing is I'm embedding him into this glaze. When that's a bit drier, then I'm going to go over it and do some blending, because where the bee is not blended, it's nice and soft blue. I'm going to just blend that in and use all the colors that I've got left to give it a little splish and a splash. So I've got a background. You can really have some fun. If you have a banding wheel, you can make some awesome gifts. And then this little guy just goes into the bowl of water and he's washed again and again and again. So you don't necessarily always need something that can stick. You just need something that you can stick in the paint. And then that opens up all of the possibilities. Let me show you the finished pieces. So you can go in and you can paint the bees. Now, what I did with these bees is I painted them on before I did the blue. And I painted them onto the bare bisque and then I waxed over them. So when I went over with the blue, they didn't get covered in the blue, which is a lovely technique and works very well. But again, you have the risk of the pooling of the blue on top of the wax. So you might find it easier, and Stroke and Coat is very forgiving like that you can add on with your 3 layers and paint over, which I did in subsequent bees. I hope you've learned loads of wonderful techniques and you've got yourself nice and mucky today, because that means you're having the best time. And I will be doing lots more of these workshops and I would really love to see you. All right. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.